everyone, and welcome to this Groupby session for creating a SQL Server test lab on your workstation by David Fowler, also known as SQL Undercover. So David is a database administrator with over 15 years of experience working with SQL Server. He started with version 6.5, and now he's all the way up to 2017. So welcome, David. Take it away.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah. Welcome to my little session here at Groupby, creating a SQL Server test lab on your workstation. So, is my little quickie jobby not working? No, that's dead. Right, okay, that's a good start, isn't it? I have to do it to the old-fashioned way. Okay, so just a quick introduction of myself. My name is David Fowler. Been working with SQL for about 17, 18 years now. I have to update that LinkedIn page. Blog over on SQLundercover.com. Me and myself, there's a good friend Adrian Buckman with me as well. We've got blog posts over there, a bunch of tools, free tools, scripts. We've got a webinar and a few other exciting bits that are coming up, so feel free to go and check that out. And if anyone wants to contribute, please feel free. I've got two twin boys. They're 9 months now, so they're keeping me well on my toes. And when I'm not nerding over SQL or changing dirty nappies, my other love is cycling. I love racing bikes. I race everything from road bikes, mountain bikes, cyclocross, time trialing. Just if it's got two wheels, I'm kind of going to be all over it. So that's me. If you want to get in touch with me, you can drop me a line at david@sqlundercover.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You'll find me on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter, but SQL Undercover is, so you can drop SQL Undercover a little note, just put a little FAO David, it'll find its way to me. And any cyclist can also get me on Strava. So that's me. On to the session. So what is this session going to be about? Pretty much what it says on the tin. We're going to be looking at using desktop virtualization software to build a ring-fenced SQL Server test domain. So what's the point? Why do we want to do this? What's the reason for doing that? In an ideal world, we'd all have a lovely little slice of the virtual environment or a bunch of servers or something like that that sit in its own little ring-fenced domain that we can use to like a little sandbox. We can spin up SQL servers, we can play around with the domain, we can just fiddle around with things and just test out different behaviours. For most of us, that's not the case. Most of us, the best we've got is a SQL Server Developer Edition on our workstation, which is kind of all right for some things, but if you want to muck around with availability groups, we want to muck around with clustering, we want to play around with firewalls, we want to do these sort of things. We can't really do that in a developer edition on our workstation. Also, we don't really necessarily want to be doing that in anything that's connected to a production environment, to a production domain. So that's why it's sort of frustration not having a sort of tool, not having someone that can test these sort of things. I sort of put together this little test lab that I'm going to walk you guys through. So what is this session not going to be about? We are not going to be having a big deep dive into virtualization. This is not a best practice session either. Okay, so I'm building a test lab. I'll probably do a few things just to make my life a bit easier that you probably don't want to be doing in production. So if you see me do something a little bit silly, please don't shout at me. Say, David, don't do that. It is a test lab. You know, it's just for testing a few little things, a sandbox. So with that out of the way, what are we actually going to be building today? So we are going to start off, we're going to build ourselves a domain controller. We're going to set up a Windows Active Directory domain. We're going to spin up a couple of SQL servers. We're going to build a Windows failover cluster. And finally, we're going to set ourselves up an availability group. So there's quite a bit there to go into. And each of those little things on their own could be a whole session. So all I really want to do, I just want to give you the fundamentals. I'm not going to dive into the details of how to set up an Active Directory domain, dive into group policies, that sort of thing. We're not doing that. Same as failover clustering. I'm not going to dive into real deep depth of failover clustering. I just want to give you an overview just so you can go away and set up something like this that you can have on your workstation to do your tests with. So what do you need? What are you going to need if you want to set this up? Now, there's a little bit of misconception when it comes to virtualization. People think you need some massive, great, big, huge, powerful rig to run anything. Not necessarily the case. What we're building today will run quite happily on a pretty modesty spec PC, workstation, even a laptop. There are a few things you are going to need. First of all, you need a CPU that supports physical virtualization. So if you check out your CPU, you're looking for a CPU that supports Intel VT, or if you're an AMD V. Most kind of mid-range processors do support that, so you shouldn't have too much of a problem. You might find, even if your process does support this, that when you come to try and spin up your virtual machines, you're getting funny errors about this isn't supported. Quite often in BIOS, this is disabled. So you might need to dip into your BIOS and just make sure it's enabled in BIOS. You're going to want fast storage. Fast storage is quite important. One thing I've noticed, by the time you've got a few VMs up and running, you get a lot of disk contention. So the faster storage is going to be the better. Okay. And for what we're setting up today, I reckon probably 8 gig of RAM is going to be what you're going to need. So that's your technical requirements. What else are we going to need? We're going to need a hypervisor. So what's hypervisor? Hypervisor is just simply a little bit of software, a bit of kit that runs our virtual machines for us, that manages our virtual machines. With desktop hypervisors, we've got 3 main players. We've got Microsoft's Hyper-V. Now, Hyper-V comes included with Windows Pro. To turn it on, or if you go into Windows features, you'll find a little tick box next to Hyper-V. Just tick that and you'll be good to go with Hyper-V. It's not available on Home. So if you're running Windows Home Edition, this isn't going to be available to you, unfortunately. We've got Oracle's VirtualBox. Now, Oracle's VirtualBox is completely free to download. You can nip up onto their website, you can download it, you can install it. It's compatible with all editions of Windows, and that includes Home Edition. It's compatible with Linux, OS X and Solaris. So it's got a good OS compatibility. So if you're not a Windows user or you are using Home Edition and Hyper-V isn't going to be available to you, this could be a good option. And lastly, we've got VMware Workstation. Now this comes in 2 different flavors. There's a free version, which is VMware Player. That's very, very limited. It's the main limitation for us is that it only allows us to run 1 VM at a time, which probably isn't a lot of use for the sort of setup we're going to do. VMware Pro is fully featured, but it will cost you a little bit of money. It was around about £250 last time I looked. I think that's around what, $300, €300, I expect. So it costs you a little bit of money, but it is fully featured. So out of 3, which is the best one? To be honest with you, there's not a lot to choose between them. They all got the same features. They've all got the same look and feel to the management consoles. The only difference is the compatibility with OS. We're going to be using the Oracle VirtualBox today, just because I like it's widely compatible and everyone can run this thing. But it doesn't matter which one you use. I've done this demo with VirtualBox. I've had people following me using Hyper-V and VMware. As I say, the look and feel are very, very similar. They've been able to follow along absolutely fine. So just choose whichever suits you. So that's our hypervisor out of the way. So let's get down to the demo. So this is VirtualBox. Okay, so the first time you spin it up, you're going to notice on the left-hand side, we've got all our VMs. And over on the right-hand side, we get a little bit of information about our VMs. Now, when you first start up your VirtualBox the first time, you're not going to have any VMs there. So the first thing you're going to want to do is probably create your first VM. Simple enough to do, the little new button up here. Hit that, and it'll bring up a little wizard for us. Okay, so let's call our first VM. We'll call this my first VM. Okay, we can select whereabouts on our host we want to save that. I'm just going to leave it as default. If you've got a drive you want to put it onto, or you want to put it in a different location, that's fine. We can select what operating system we're going to install on this thing. So we're going to be installing Windows, and we can select what version of the operating system. Now, I'm going to be installing Windows 2019 on this one. Now, VirtualBox haven't called up with Microsoft yet, so it doesn't give us anything higher than 2016. So we'll just call it other Windows 64-bit. I'm not sure what actual difference this settings make. I think it just gives you a few basic settings. So we then need to set up some memory. Well, 512 meg isn't going to be a lot of good, is it, for this thing? So we're going to let's give it 2 gig of RAM. Now, when you're allocating the RAM, you want to be a little bit careful here because it is possible to over-allocate RAM. So what do I mean by that? If I set this machine up with 2 gig of RAM, as soon as I start that machine up, VirtualBox is going to allocate 2 gig of my host machine's RAM to this VM. It doesn't matter if that VM's only using a fraction of that. That full 2 gig will always be allocated to that VM. I spin up a second VM with 2 gig of RAM. That's another 2 gig slice that's going to get allocated to a VM. So we've now got 4 gig of RAM allocated to VMs. Now, if we've got a machine with, say, 8 gig of RAM, and we spin up 4 of these machines, what's going to happen? We're going to have 8 gig of RAM allocated to VMs. Our host is going to get nothing. And bad things are going to start happening. So just be a little bit careful. You can over allocate RAM. Make sure you leave a little bit of overhead for your host machine. When I've done this live, I've kind of demonstrated what happens when you blow the machine out, but as I'm streaming, that's not going to work well, so I won't do that today. But yeah, so just be a little bit aware of that. Our hard disk, we want to create ourselves a virtual hard disk. So once we've got these little settings in, we just hit create. That's going to take us to a virtual hard disk wizard. We can set the size of our virtual hard disk. So 20 gigs, a little bit stingy. Let's call it 200. We can choose a hard disk file type. We've got a few options here. Just leave the default. It doesn't really make much difference. And over here, storage on physical disk. Again, we've got two options: dynamic allocation or fixed size. So what's the difference with these? Dynamic allocation, what that is going to do, that is going to mean that the actual hard disk file itself will only be as big as the amount of data that's being used. So if we've got, even though we've got a 200 gig virtual hard disk here, if our virtual machine is only using, say, 10 gig of that, that file is only going to actually be 10 gig of size on our host hard disk. Fixed size will allocate the whole 200 gig. So fixed size is going to be quicker, but I don't think we want loads of 200 gig virtual hard disks kicking around on our host machines, on our workstations. So I'm just going to stick with dynamic allocation. Now, you might see a few differences with this term depending on which hypervisor you're using. I think VMware certainly has got a difference. So with VMware, you might see the terms thick provisioning and thin provisioning. So thin provisioning is just exactly the same as dynamic allocation. Thick provisioning means fixed size. So yeah, so it just depends on which hypervisor you're using. You might see different terms. So once we're good, we can hit create and we'll have our first VM. So now we've got our first VM, we've got to do a little bit more configuration to make it usable. So we can right click and we get a little settings window, which we can just hit there to give us a settings window. And there's a few things we can do here. Under advanced, we've got a couple of options for shared clipboard and drag and drop. First thing I like to do with these is just switch these to bidirectional. So what these are going to do, this means we can just share the clipboard between our host and our virtual machines. So with a shared clipboard, anything we can cut something from the host and we can paste it into the VM and vice versa. Drag and drop is going to allow us to take a file and drag it and drop it between the host and the VM. Just useful little things. We've got a description tab where we can, this is purely for our own benefit. If we want to write a description of this VM, so in the future we wonder what it does, we know, so we can say something like, this is my first VM. And disk encryption, to be honest with you, I just wouldn't bother worry about. Under system, we can alter our base memory. So we originally allocated 2 gig, we can up or down this. Now you can go to these settings anytime. So whatever, even if you only allocate 2 gig RAM when you first create this VM, you can come in and change this at any time. Some options you need to power the VM down for, some of them you can do on the fly. For memory, I think you need to power it down first. It depends a little bit on the hypervisor as well. Some will let you change these things on the fly, some of them you need to power the VM down to make the changes. We can allocate a number of processors. So let's give it 2 processors. So I'm only going to stick with 1 because my CPU is running a little bit hot today for some reason. I don't want to cause too much trouble. So we'll just stick with 1 processor for that. We've got some display options. We can allocate video memory if we want to do that. Under storage, we can see all the storage that's provisioned for this VM. So we can see the hard disk, the virtual hard disk, and a little bit of information about our virtual hard disk. So we can see, we've got to say about the dynamic allocation and the fixed size allocation. It's telling us the virtual size, this hard disk, is 200 gig, but the actual size on disk, because there's nothing on it yet, this machine is just an empty machine, is only taking up 2 meg of actual hard disk space on my machine. We have ourselves an optical drive, a CD, DVD-ROM drive. We can use ISO files. We can mount ISO files to this drive. So at the moment, we've got no operating system. So the first thing we're going to want to do is install an operating system. So what we can do, we can come into this little drive, hit this little CD here, and it's going to give us the option to choose an ISO file, to mount an ISO file onto that drive. So we can mount our installation media. So we've got a Windows 2019 ISO file. We can mount that into our virtual machine. And we can also, of course, add more drives if we want to. So we've got an option to add another hard drive. We can add another optical drive. Let's just have a look. So to show you, add a hard drive. We'll say we can create a new disk. Okay, it's just going to pretty much go through the same wizard we saw earlier on when we was creating the first virtual disk on this machine. Network. Any of our virtual machines can have up to 4 different virtual network adapters connected to them. Each of these can have a number of different settings. So we're only going to use one. We can have NAT, network address translation. What this is going to do, it's going to allow a virtual machine to see certain things out on our external network. And when I say external network, I'm talking about our home network or our office network. So it will allow it to see things like perhaps the internet, perhaps some network resources. What it doesn't do is actually doesn't let the network see our virtual machine. We've got bridged, which takes NAT a little bit further. With bridged, it just physically joins our virtual machine to our external network. So our virtual machine will act like any other device that's connected to our network. It will be able to see anything on the network, and the network will be able to see it. We have internal network. Now, internal network just joins our virtual machine to a network that's internal to our hypervisor. It'll only be able to see any other virtual machines that are joined to that virtual network. It won't be able to see anything out on our external network, and it won't be able to see an our net. I'm getting myself all tongue-tied. And our virtual our device out on our external network won't be able to see any of our virtual machines. So this is what we want. If we want to create a nice ring-fenced environment, which is what we're trying to do today, this is exactly the thing we're going to do. We have got one other interesting option here, which is host-only adapter. Now, host-only adapter is exactly the same as internal network. The only difference is it will create a virtual network adapter on your physical host machine, so your host will be able to see your internal network. But we're just going to stick with internal network for today. Kind of hoping that makes sense. So that's pretty much all we need to do to set up our machine. That's the initial setup done. So once we're done there, we can just right-click this thing and hit start. We're going to go normal start. And our virtual machine should start up for us. Any minute now, here it comes. So it's got no operating system, but because we've mounted that Windows installation media, it's going to come in and it's going to boot that installation media and it's going to start installing Windows. Now, I'm not going to go for a Windows installation because I'm pretty sure people are going to be fairly happy with that. It takes a bit of time. So let's just shut this one off. And we'll move over to one that I've already prepared earlier. Windows 2019 first build. So let's just start this one up. So this is just a complete fresh build of Windows. Exactly the same settings as what we just set up in that first VM. We don't want to boot from a CD. I've obviously left the installation media mounted. So that will just start up for us. Any minute now. We're on a bit of a go slow. There we go. Right, we're in. So we've got ourselves our first virtual machine running Windows. So let's log in. Now, what I like to do, once I've got a machine up and running like this, I like to build basically a template or a gold build. Okay, so this is going to be a machine that I'm going to use now to clone any other machines that I want to spin up. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do with this machine, I want to do all of our basic standard installation. So we're going to install all of our Windows updates on this now. I'm not actually going to go for Windows updates installs, but what we could do, we could install our Windows updates. We're going to install any sort of perhaps corporate branding, any desktops, anything like that you might want to put on there. Okay, so this is just going to be a machine that's going to be set up to our basic standard setup. One thing you are going to want to do when you come in here, the first time you open up your machine, if we come up to devices, we've got a little option here, insert guest edition CD image. So this is just basically a CD, an ISO file. If we come into my PC, we'll see it mounted guest editions. So this is just an ISO file that will hold a number of drivers. Okay, so it's a load of drivers that are going to make running our VMs a lot easier. So we're just going to install these. So this contains drivers that are going to control things like, that allows that desktop sharing that I was saying about earlier, the drag and drop. It'll allow a full screen console view and just a bunch of other stuff that just makes our VMs run a little bit nicer. So we're just going to install that, let that run through. Another thing I like to do as standard on my machine the first time I start one up, oh, there we go, and this thing that's installed in, is switch off the firewall. Okay, I know some people will get a bit upset about this. Okay, we switch off the firewall standard. But like I said, it's not a best practice session, and I just like to do things that make my life a little bit easier. And the last thing I want to do, if I'm trying to test something or try and troubleshoot something or test a bit of functionality, the last thing I want to be doing is worrying about troubleshooting firewall issues. So I just generally just switch this thing off. Obviously, if you want to do some testing around the firewall, you can always just switch it back on again. But let's switch that off. That's done. Our guest editions should be finished, which they are. I'm not going to reboot now. But you might want to do this. Actually, when you're doing this, you probably will want to do the reboot. So I'm just skipping a few little phases to save a bit of time. So we've now got ourselves a machine that's got all of our standard setup on it. It's got all of our drivers on it. It's got any sort of corporate brand that we might want on it. It's got any firewall settings switched off. It's got the guest editions installed. So the guest editions is something that comes with VirtualBox, but all the hypervisors have got something very, very similar. VMware, you'll have VMware Tools. Hyper-V has got, I forget the name of the Hyper-V's version. That might be client editions or client tools, something along those lines. But every hypervisor has got these drivers just to make life a little bit easier, just make it run a little bit, things run a little bit easier. So once you've got those installed, we've got ourselves a machine now that is in our standard state. This is going to be our template machine. So the next thing we're going to do, before we can do anything else with this thing, is just to come into the C drive. We're going to go down to Windows. We're going to look for, forgetting where it is now, System 32. It's got to get a bit late, so my head's not quite with it. And we're looking for sysprep. There it is. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is run sysprep. So what sysprep is going to do now, it's going to pretty much take this machine and kind of revert it back to almost a first run state. Okay, it's going to preserve all of our settings. It's going to preserve all those drivers, any software that we've installed, anything like that, but take it back to a first run state. It's going to reset the machine SID. It's going to reset the admin password. Your location settings will get reset. If you're using an evaluation version of Windows, it also resets the evaluation counter as well. So it's kind of like when you buy a new machine from Dell or from HP and you start it up and it asks you for all those first, what's your location? And you go in there, it's already set up. It's already set up with a few little tools that Dell might have wanted to install or HP has installed. This is the sort of thing that they're doing. So first thing, we've got to want out-of-box experience. We click Generalize and shutdown options. So this is just what's going to happen once it finishes doing sysprep. We just want the machine to shut down. So we'll click that, and it's going to start working. It's going to start doing all that resetting, taking us back to a first run state. It takes a little while, so I'm going to close this one down now because I've got a little one I've already prepped earlier. So let's just power this straight off. So once that's finished, once the machine's shut down, we'll end up with something that we're going to use for a template. Okay. So what we've done now, we've built a virtual machine and we've created a template. So now the next thing we want to do is build our domain controller. So now we don't need to now go through the whole process of creating a virtual machine, installing it. All we need to do now is come to our template. We can right click our template and we can hit clone. We're going to give our template a name. So I'm going to call this domain controller. We've got a few options. Okay, we can clone, you've got a full clone or a linked clone. Now I would always go with a full clone. A linked clone saves a bit of disk space because it uses snapshots and things behind the scenes, but you can kind of get yourself in a little bit of trouble with that, and I just stick with full clone. It's a lot easier. Snapshots, again, just stick with current machine state. We don't need to take any snapshots because there aren't any in this state. MAC address policy, I always just say generate new MAC addresses, just keeps things nice and clean. And then once we're done, we hit clone, and this is now going to go off, it's going to create a clone of that template. So instead of having to now create a new virtual machine, install Windows, go in and configure everything, install all our drivers, all we need to do is just hit clone. Now, don't be worried, it says 12 minutes, but it doesn't usually take that long. It will take a minute or two to do its thing, and then we'll be good. Come on. Play ball, play ball. So this is a beautiful thing that we've been able to clone these things off. We can create as many machines as we want really, really quickly. This is one of the nice things I love about virtualization. So now every time we use a machine, when we come to create our 2 SQL servers, we don't need to install the server. We can just create a clone. And see, it's that quickly. We've now got ourselves our domain controller. So let's start this thing up and install our domain controller. So we double click to get it started up. Here it comes. It shouldn't take too long to come up, hopefully. Well, it's guaranteed going to go slow now, isn't it? It always is. When I'm doing something live, let's just go slow. Let's take forever. Come on, Windows.
That's the trick with the live demos, right? You're just kind of at the mercy.
This is it, isn't it? Oh dear. Well, no, we're getting there, I think.
Oh.
Well, you've got to remember, this come from our templates. It is still, this is the first startup, so it's still doing all its little bits and bobs that it would normally do in the first startup, generating the SIDs and doing all its whatnot. So, but yeah, it's taking longer than normal today, but it's all right. We've got a bit of time, I think, to watch the little thing spin around.
Yeah, you're right about a little bit under the half mark, so you still got a whole half an hour to.
That's cool. Cool, no worries. I should have a screen. I've got a few bits later on. I have got demo screenshots because that does tend to take a little while. But this is usually okay.
Are you going to be touching anything on running VirtualBox headless, or is this not that type of session?
I wasn't going to go into. I could show you if we get time. Yeah, I'll show you that. But yeah, I wasn't really going to dive into that. There's quite a bit to get through, so I'm just trying to give a bit.
I don't want to derail anything for you, so
no, that's fine. No, that's fine. I mean, there's a lot of things I'll be honest. There's a lot of things I am skipping over, but we'll see where we get to.
Cool.
So, as I say, our machine. It's kind of gone back to a first run state. So it wants us to select our location. Okay, UK. I'm happy with that. So let's hit next. It's going to come up with the old licensing agreement. Excellent. Okay, we're good with that. And it's going to want an administrator password. So let's give it one of those. Now, this is going to be the domain controller. So the administrator password you put in here is going to be a little bit important later on. So make sure you remember that. When we promote this thing to a domain controller, we create a domain, the administrator password for this server will become the administrator password for the domain. It will become the domain administrator password. So we need to make sure we keep hold of this password. So let's finish that. It's going to be all good. And we've got ourselves a nice server. Let's log into that. Password's wrong. Oh dear. We are on a go slow, don't we? Really is today. It's just doing that to me. Right, okay, our machine's coming up slowly. Okay, first thing we're going to want to do, we need to sort out the networking on this thing first. So we come down to network and open network and internet settings. We're going to click on Ethernet and change adapter options. There we go. Right, okay, so it gives us nice that we can see all of our network adapters. So if we right click, we can go into properties. We're looking for Internet Protocol version 4, okay, IPv4. If we hit properties of that, we're going to need to set up an IP address for this machine of ours, okay? So use the following IP address. Now, you can use whatever standard you want, okay? My usual standard for a server is always, let's put numlock on, is always 10.0.0. And for domain controller, I always go 10.0.0.1. It's just my little standard. I know what that is then. Okay, you can devise your own standards. It's good to have a standard though, because then at least you know then what the box is. I know people have all sorts of weird and wonderful IP addresses. You come and say, what's the IP of that box? Oh, no idea, they say. So if you've got a standard, at least you kind of know roughly where you're going with it. Default gateway. I'm not going to set up a gateway today, but when I do, that always sits on the domain controller when I'm doing a test lab like this. So again, we're pointing that at our domain controller's IP address, which is 10.0.0.1. And our DNS server, again, is going to be our domain controller, which is going to be 10.0.0.1. With that done, we can hit OK. We can close this. And we send the network. We click yes to that. Cool. So that's our network. We've joined to the network. The next thing we're going to need to do is give this thing a sensible name. Now, whenever a new server gets installed, it comes with an absolute nonsense name. So if we come into Server Manager here, click on Local Server, we can see the computer name is WinNU. What's that all about? Why does it do that? Why does it not call it Server 1 or something? But this is what they do. So we want to change that to something sensible. So let's click on that. And we've got an option here, rename this computer or change its domain. Okay, let's change and give it a decent computer name. It's domain controller, so let's call it DCO1. Nice and simple. We've got options to put a domain in here now. Now, we haven't created a domain yet, so we're going to leave that blank. We're just going to leave it work group. We'll click OK. Okay, it tells us we need to restart. Okay, when you do this, you probably want to do a restart at this point. I'm not going to do a restart just because it saves a little bit of time, but let's just pretend we restarted, okay? When the machine comes back up, the next thing we now need to do is install our domain services. So this is what's going to allow us to set up the domain, make this thing a domain controller. To do that, we're in Server Manager again. So Server Manager, this is our best friend. So Server Manager is where we can do all of our funky stuff, all of our configurations, all of our installations. So we're going to come up into Manage. We're going to go to Add Roles and Features. Okay, so we're going to hit Next. And we've got installation type. Okay, role-based or feature-based installation. That sounds good to me. Server selection. Okay, this should be the server we're currently on. At the moment, it's got nonsense name with nonsense IP address. You will have restarted your box at this point, so hopefully you should be seeing DCO1 or whatever you've called this thing and the IP address of 10.0.0.1 or again whatever your standard you want to call it. Yes, we're happy with that. We can click Next and Server Roles. So we're looking at installing domain services. So we click the domain services button. It's now going to give us a bunch of features. These are a bunch of prereq features that it needs. So yeah, I'm happy with that. We can click Add Features. And as I said before, this is also going to be our DNS server. So we're going to need to install DNS server. So we can click the DNS server. Again, a bunch of free prereq features. We can add those features. We'll click Next. There's no more features to add. So we again, click Next again. It's just pretty much now just clicking Next through this little wizard, okay? If you want to read this stuff, you're more than welcome to. We're going to a confirmation page, which is just going to give us a little rundown of what we're installing. Okay, we're happy with that. We hit install. It's now going to go off and it's going to install domain services for us. Again, this takes a little bit of time, so I am just going to close this machine down. Let's power that one off. So the next bit of the demo I'm just going to do on screenshots because it does take a little bit of time. But in the meantime, I'm just going to power up a couple of these SQL servers so that they'll be ready when we need them in a minute. That one's coming up, lovely. And let's bring this one up too. Cool. Okay, that one's its way back up. So let's head back over to my PowerPoint slides. So what have we done so far? Okay, we have set up a virtual machine. We've created a template that we can clone from. We've set up a domain controller. We've set up a machine which is going to be our domain controller. We've installed domain services. We've installed DNS on that thing. Now we need to set up our domain. So after we've installed domain services, our machine is going to reboot. And when it comes back up, we're going to come into our best friend here, Server Manager. Okay, remember, Server Manager is where we want to be. That's where we do all of our stuff. This time, you're going to see over here that we've got a little exclamation mark. Okay, there's an action there. So if we click on that little flag, you can see we've now got the option to promote this server to domain controller. Okay, looks good. Click on that. We're going to come up with a deployment configuration. So this is what's now going to set up our domain for us. Okay, we're going to need to add a new forest. Okay, we're going to need to give our domain a name. Okay, in this case, I've called it SQL undercover.local. You could call it Groupby or whatever you want to call it. Just pop a domain name in there. Hit Next. Okay, we're going to get a bunch of options. Now, you can pretty much stick with the defaults here. Even though I'm using Windows Server 2019, it still defaults. It always says Windows Server 2016. There is no 2019 option. So stick with those defaults. You're going to need a password for the directory service restore mode. So what is directory service restore mode? What that is, the DSRM, it's just basically a kind of a safe mode for your domain controller. So if your domain controller goes belly up, you need to open it up in some sort of safe mode. This is what you're going to use to do it, okay? We're not going to bother about that. This is a test domain. If my domain controller goes belly up, I just kill it and build a new one. But it won't let us go any further without a password, so just pop a password in there. Hit next. Okay, we've got DNS options. We've got a little bit of a warning. A delegation of this DNS server can't be created because the authoritative parent so cannot be found. Yeah, we don't care about that, so you can happily click next there. Additional options is going to show us our net BIOS name of our domain. Just leave that as it is. You haven't got to worry about that either. So setting up a domain, it's not scary. A lot of people think that set up a domain is some weird wizardry. It's this simple. Just click, click, click through the wizard. It really is. There's nothing mystical or magical to it. You can get silly, okay? It can get really complicated when you start really going into it. But what we're doing, what we need, it's dead simple. So we're going to click next. We've got some paths. Again, guess what? We're going to stick with, well, if you really want to change these things, which I don't know why you would. Perhaps you do. I don't. So I'm going to leave them as they are. Stick defaults. And we're going to get we're going to review our options. So we can have a little look at what we're setting up. So we can see that we're setting up a domain called SQL.local. We've got a net BIOS name. And all of our little kind of things that we've chosen are all there, okay? You can check that if you like. Hit next. We're going to get a prereqs check. You're going to get a couple of little, perhaps little warnings here. Don't worry about those too much. Just scroll to the bottom. As long as we've got a little green tick that all prereqs are good, I'm happy. We can hit install. Okay, that's now going to go off. It's going to install the domain. It's going to set the domain up for us. The domain controller is going to want to reboot. And when it comes back up, you'll see that we are now part of a domain. So we now have ourselves a domain controller and an active directory domain. Excellent. Next thing we need to do is spin up those SQL servers. So all we show you how to do that. All we need to do there is just go to our template and create a couple of clones. Okay, create a couple of clones, call them SQL 01, SQL 02, which are the ones I've used in mine, or any other sort of sensible name you want. I don't get all these people that call their servers Gandalf and Bilbo and all that. What's that all about? I've no idea. I've no idea what any of those things are. But I guarantee people, yeah, well, I was called by Luke Skywalker or something. What is that? I don't know. SQL 01, SQL 02, I know what that is. Anyway,
David, you got a quick question from Ben Miller. He was asking how the VirtualBox NAT compares to the VMware Workstation NAT. Do you know it all?
I have no idea.
All right. Got that
to be honest, I don't know.
Sorry, Ben.
You have to check the docs. I have no idea.
That's totally okay.
Sorry.
We tried.
Had a go, didn't we? So spin up your SQL servers. Okay, create 2 clones. You're then going to want to join those to the network. So again, exactly the same way as you did with your domain controller, you're going to go down to your network settings. You're going to pull up your internet IPv4 settings. Okay, you're going to give it an IP address. So remember, your IP address has always got to be unique. Okay, it sounds obvious, but I know people that have decided to give all their servers 10.0.0.1 and then wondered why weird and wonderful things happen. So your IP address does have to be unique. And I know it's obvious, but I'm just going to throw it out there anyway. Okay, in this case, I've got 10.0.0.4. Remember, in my standard, 10.0.0 is always a server. So if I see 10.0.0, I know it's going to be a server of some sort. Subnet mask, again, you just leave it as it is. The gateway, so the gateway, as I said before, we're not installing a gateway, but if we did, it would be living on my domain controller. So we point that at my domain controller's IP address, which, as we know, domain controller is, in my world, is always 10.0.0.1. The DNS server, again, points at the domain controller, which is 10.0.0.1. Once we're good with that, we hit OK, and we're joined to the network. Next thing we need to do is to join ourselves to the domain. So to do that, we're going to go over to our best friend, Server Manager. Okay. And again, remember, we get these horrible names as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to change the name and we're going to join ourselves to the domain. So all we need to do is just click on that little name, and that's going to bring up this little box, which is going to give us the option to rename the computer or change its domain. That sounds like the sort of thing we want to be doing. So hit change. Give your computer a name. Okay, we've got SQL 03. Give it a domain. So this time we are going to add a domain because we've now got a domain. So click domain. Add your domain name, SQL_local or Groupby or whatever you guys want to call your domain. Once you're done there, hit OK, And you're now going to be asked for the credentials of a user that's got permissions to that domain. Now this, remember when we first started, when I said when we were installing that domain controller and we gave it the admin password, I said keep hold of that admin password because you're going to need it. Okay, and this is why. This is why, because your admin password will be automatic by default. It's also the password of your domain administrator. So as your domain name, so in the case SQL Undercover /administrator is going to be the account we're going to use. We're going to pop in that admin password. We click OK, and with any luck, we should see a lovely little screen saying, welcome to the domain. Excellent, cool, lovely stuff. So we click OK, and we're going to want to restart. We're going to bounce the box, it's going to come back up, and we're going to be part of our domain. Excellent stuff. So we've now got a domain controller, a domain, and 2 servers that are part of that domain. Right, we can now go install SQL Server on our 2 SQL servers. I'm not going to go for a SQL Server install. It takes time, and I'm pretty sure everyone's kind of happy with the SQL Server install anyway. So let's just skip through that. Let's just pretend we've installed SQL Server. And next thing we're going to do is install a failover cluster. So I'm now going to pop back over to my VirtualBox and show you how we go about installing a failover cluster. So let's go to SQL 01, just because I'm a little bit like that. I like to go from doing work on 1. So let's log into this box. As you see, it's put my name there. So I've already actually created a couple of accounts in Active Directory as well. I wasn't going to show you how to do that. If I've got time, I might give you a quick show you how to do that because not everyone knows that. It could be a nice thing to see. But we'll see how we go for time. So anyway, we logged into my SQL Server. So we've already got the SQL Server installed in this box now. We know it's joined to domain. We know it's on the network. So we need to set up a clustering. So what we need to do, again, we need to come back into our best friend server manager. We're going to come up to manage because we need to install failover clustering. So we're going to go to add roles and features, exactly the same as we're doing when we're setting up domain services. We're going to click next. Again, we're going to stick with role-based or feature-based installation. We're going to click next and server select. So this time, again, as you can see, so our server name, SQL 01, and our IP address in this case is 10.0.0.2. Good. Yep, that's our server. I'm happy enough with that. We're going to come to server roles. Now, this isn't a role, so there's nothing in here for us to check. Failover clustering is under feature. Now, the amount of time I've spent hunting, I go to roles, go, where is it? Where's failover clustering? Where's failover clustering? It's not, it's a feature. Okay, so I've already actually installed it to save a little bit of time, but what you're going to do, you're going to click failover clustering, you'll hit install, it'll just go off and install it. There's nothing, no wizard, nothing else to worry about at this point. It'll install it, it'll probably reboot the server. I think it reboots the server. And then once that's done, if we go to tools, we'll notice that we now can see a failover cluster manager. So let's open that up and see what that gives us. Here it comes. So at the moment, we can see, let's just close this down, I don't want that. We can see we've got no cluster, okay? There's no cluster installed on this machine. So let's right click that and we can go to create cluster. Okay, that's now going to bring us into a cluster wizard. Okay, so click next. We need to select the servers that are going to be part of this cluster. Okay, so we're going to pop in our 2 SQL servers, SQL 01, hit add, that'll go do a bit of validation, and when it's happy, it'll pop me in there for us. Excellent, which it is. We're going to have SQL 02, which again, we'll add that. It's going to do a bit of validation, and when it's happy, in a minute, it's going to pop it into that selected servers for us. SQL 02 could not be SQL 02, that's because I've given it the wrong name. Let's try again, SQL 02. And with any luck this time, yes, excellent. So we've now got our 2 SQL servers showing up in there. Cool. The next option is validation warning. Okay, so I'm going to say no to this. What this will do, it'll go off, it'll do a bunch of validation checks and produce a little validation report. The only real reason for that validation report is for Microsoft. So if you ever phone up Microsoft and get them to come and support your cluster for any reason, before they do anything, they will want to see this validation report. Now, on our test lab, I'm pretty sure Microsoft aren't going to be getting involved in it, so I'm just going to say no. If you want to see what it looks like, click yes. No reason not to. If you want to see what it looks like, it takes a bit of time to run though, so I'm not going to do it, but feel free if you want to do that. We click next. Okay, we now need to give our cluster a name. So let's call this thing imaginatively cluster 01. It's got a name, it's going to need an IP address. Now, in my little standard, while a server is always 10.0.0, a cluster is always, in my world, 10.0.1. Okay, again, it just makes life easy for me. I know when I see his IP address, I know exactly what it is. So we'll call this IP address 10.0.1.1. Okay, so it's going to be the IP address of our cluster. We'll hit next, and it's going to give us a little summary of what we're installing. So we've got a cluster named cluster 1. We've got these 2 SQL nodes in there. We've got an IP address. Excellent, we're happy with that. We can click next. And it's going to go off, and it's now going to go off and create our cluster for us. So this, again, so it shouldn't take too long to do this. But the way things are going today, it's going to take forever, isn't it? Right, so our cluster's now built. We'll click finish there. How are we doing? Just over 10 minutes. We should be good. Right, so we should now see we've got a cluster. Okay, if we open up and look at nodes, we should see we have our 2 SQL nodes all looking good with little green ticks or little green ups. Excellent. Okay, so there we go. We've now, what have we done? We've built ourselves a domain controller. We've built ourselves a domain. We've set up 2 SQL servers, and we've now set up a cluster. So now we've got that, we can then go and set up our availability groups. So there's a little bit of configuration we need to do now to allow our SQL servers to be joined to an availability group. If we come down to our SQL configuration manager, come on. I'm looking in the wrong place. It's getting late here now as well. What time is it? It's 10 to 10 in the evening over here, so it's my eyes are going blurry. So configuration manager, what we want. So a couple of things we're going to check. So this is a new SQL installation, so we need to check that TCP IP is enabled. Otherwise, we're going to have funny problems. In this case, it is. You're going to be in an AG, so you want to make sure that your SQL Server is running as a domain account. Okay, I've already set domain account up ahead of time to do this. You'll need to do that if you haven't done that already. And the other thing you'll do is if we go into properties, we need to make sure under high availability that we've got high availability enabled. Okay, so we should see our cluster names. It's worth just make sure that you see the correct cluster name there. Click enable a high availability, apply that. And we'll need to restart our SQL Server for that to take effect. So let's just give that a restart. We'll need to do that exactly the same thing on both SQL servers. So let's come over to our second SQL Server. Let's log into this one. Now, we don't need to do anything with the clustering on this one. So we only need to set the clustering up on one server. Okay, so it's up on one server. It applies to all the servers that are in that cluster. Although you will need to install, that's the point I didn't cover. When you install failover clustering on one, you need to install failover cluster on all of your servers. You'll need to do the configuration on one, but you will need to have failover cluster installed on all of your servers. Nearly missed that point. So let's come over here. Let's open up our configuration manager again. Let's close you down. I'm not interested in you. Okay, so again, we're going to do the same checks here. We're going to just check our TCP IP is enabled, which it is. We need to make sure that we're running as a domain account, which we are. Now, again, as I said about best practices, I've used the same domain account as for both services. On both servers, you may not want to do that, but as I say, it's a test lab, so I just tend to cut a few corners. So let's right click, let's go to properties, always on high availability. Again, check the cluster name's correct. Click enable always on, hit OK. It's going to tell us we need to bounce the service. So let's right click, restart the service. And it'll take a little minute to do that, but it shouldn't take too long. Cool. And we should now be in a place where we can go and create our availability groups. So let's pop down to our domain controller. Now, the domain controller is also my little workhorse as well. I run Management Studio from that. You wouldn't do that in production again, but it's a test lab. I don't want too many servers up and running that uses resource. And the domain controller seems to me to be a sensible enough place to do that. So let's log into our domain controller. We've got Management Studio. So let's connect up to SQL 01. Lovely, there's SQL 01. Let's just connect to SQL 02 as well. And now under always on high availability, availability groups, we currently have none. Okay, so let's create an availability group. Right click and we have our new availability group wizard. Let's hit that. And it'll open up a nice little wizard for us. So we'll hit next. We've got some options. So we need to give this a name. So again, in my usual imaginative way, I'm going to call this AG01. We've got a cluster type. Well, it's a Windows Server failover cluster, so yeah, let's leave that alone. You could look at database level health detection. I'm not going into that. As I say, there's a few things here that we could dive into. I'm trying to give you a bit of a brief overview. So we'll leave it as is. We'll hit next. We've got a select database. Now, this is a really annoying thing about this wizard. It always wants us to have a database to join to the AG. You don't need to. You can create an AG through scripts without databases. So I don't know why it does that. It's a little annoying feature, but okay, let's just keep it happy. Let's create ourselves a new database. Let's call it Groupby. As you see, I've managed to accidentally hit caps lock halfway through. So now, if we come over, we refresh. Great, we've got a database, but we still can't tick this box because, again, this wizard is being really pernickety and wants us to have a full backup taken beforehand. Again, why the wizard doesn't just say, hey, I'll take the backup for you. I've no idea, but it doesn't. So let's go and just create a backup of this thing just to keep it happy. So let's backup database Groupby to disk equals, I'm just going to back it up to null because I'm not interested in the file. Cool, excellent. We've now done it, we've taken a backup, so let's see if this thing complains again. We click refresh, lovely, it meets prereqs, we're good, we can click that and we can now carry on. So next thing we're going to need to do is specify our replicas. So SQL 01 is already selected. Hit add replica. Let's now select SQL 02. Just checking time, about 5 minutes. We should be okay. Okay, excellent. So we've got SQL 02. We've got a few options. We can put it into synchronous or asynchronous. So I'm not going to go over the details of what this really means, but let's make it synchronous and let's have it as automatic failover. Okay, endpoints, nothing to do here. We don't need to worry about the endpoints at all. Backup preferences. Again, this is where our log backup's going to take from by default. So click primary. There are licensing issues if you have your backups taken on a secondary, so you can all just click primary. Or okay, it doesn't really matter what you're doing on a test lab. You're using Developer Edition. Listener. So we need to create a listener name. So this is the name that we're going to use to actually connect to our availability group. So even though we've called our availability group AG1, it hasn't got a listener. We've got no way of connecting to it. It's got no entry in DNS. So we need to create that. So create availability group listener. You can call this anything you like, just to keep things nice and simple. I just generally call it exactly the same name as the AG name. We'll give it a port, which is we'll use SQL port 1433, and we're going to need to give it an IP address. So if we have, make sure we've got static IP, we'll hit add IP address. So again, in my weird little standard where 1.0.0 means a server, or 10.0.0 means a server, 10.0.1 means a cluster, 10.0.2 tells me it's an availability group. So we'll call this 10.0.2.1. Okay, we'll okay that. Excellent. We can hit next. Data synchronization. Again, I'm not going to go through what these really mean. And automatic seeding is great for small databases. So what this is basically going to do is just going to stream our database across the network straight onto our secondaries. Okay. Only caveat here is you need to make sure that your data paths are the same. So your data paths on your file paths on each of your replicas have got to match. If you've got bigger databases, it's not always the best thing to do. But as I say, I'm not going to go into the details, and there's plenty of stuff out there on your synchronization types. So we use automatic seeding. We'll just click next. It's going to go off and do a little bit of validation checking for us, which is all good, which is we like to see. It's going to give us a little summary of what it's going to do. So you've got an availability group AGO1. We can see the primary replica and a bunch of information about it. Excellent. We're happy with that. We can click finish. And now it's just going to go off. It's going to go and create our availability group for us. So with any luck, we should just now see a bunch of little green ticks appear. And then once we've done that, we've built a domain controller. We've built an Active Directory domain. We've created 2 servers, 2 SQL servers. We've created a failover cluster. And with any luck, if those last 3 little ticks turn green, we should have an availability group. So come on, 2 more to go, 1 more, and we're good. So SQL's happy. We can refresh this. We can see we've now got an availability group. Let's just have a little look at the dashboard to make sure it's behaving itself. And then we have it. We've got ourselves an availability group. So that pretty much brings me to the end of this little session. So
that timing is spectacular. You nailed it.
Not far. Well,
It is great timing.
Yep. Cheers. Thank you very much. And
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you. You made it look so simple.